Welcome to Virtual Science Night. I'm Rob, and I'm an early career fellow working at the MRC Cognition and Marine Sciences unit. I'm interested in how we learn concepts and categorize them in the world. In this talk, I'll tell you about some of my work at the unit, studying how we learn different kinds of concepts. So concepts are mental representations that enable effective storage and use of knowledge about the world. They allow us to identify or classify objects. This is categorization. So if I show you this image, you can quickly see that it's a dog. And even if I show you these more difficult images, you can see that there's some blueberries in there and some chihuahuas as well. So we can even identify objects even if we haven't seen that particular instance before. So for example, if I show you this image, you probably haven't seen this kind of dog breed before, but you can see that it's probably a dog. If you zoom close, you can see that it's probably a sheepdog. And even though you haven't seen this particular dog before, the Bergamasco, an Italian sheepdog, you can see that it's a dog. So I wanted to state that object recognition or categorization is not really a trivial problem. It's actually a very difficult one. So if I show you the image of the dog, you can see it. And another dog, you can see it. But also this very similar animal now, although you might not think it's difficult, you can see that it's probably a cat. As I showed you before, this is a funny image showing blueberries and chihuahuas, but you can kind of see the idea that image classification is not actually an easy problem. There's actually a lot of similarities between these images of blueberries and the chihuahuas. So it's a very easy thing for us, or our brains to do, but it's probably not that easy process in the brain. So we can also do generalization. So if one day you're walking around and you're a daring person and you just have a bite of this interesting looking mushroom, and it turns out it's mildly poisonous, so you don't really want to experience that again. On another day on a hike, you see different mushrooms and you might generalize, even though these don't look exactly the same. Of course, there are similar features. You might say, okay, I'm not going to have a bite of that because that's not really an experience I want to have again. And this mushroom is even more different. It's a yellow one, but you might still be able to generalize, right? So you can think of this as like an abstracted form of knowledge. After you learned about this initial experience, you can abstract from them and have some more concept-like knowledge in order to do generalization. So there are many kinds of concepts, right? There's biological, functional concepts like table and chair that we define by how we use them, as well as abstract concepts. And how do we study human concept formation and categorization? So there are many approaches. One of them is examining natural categories in humans. So what we know about like a chair, a dog, or it's also called semantic memory. There's work by those in the unit, including our director, Matthew Lamb-Routh, that study this. In my work, I study learning novel concepts with novel stimuli. And the reason for this is it allows the study of concept learning from a blank slate, so without as much interference from prior knowledge. And the focus is on simple stimuli, so we associate the concept labels with a combination of different perceptual features that I show you. And there are many methods, including behavior, cognitive modeling, and brain recording, so including functional MRI and other types of recording equipment like magnetoencephalography and electroencephalography. So these are things that can allow us to measure the brain waves whilst people are doing tasks. You might have heard about functional MRI, and this is a blood oxygen level dependent indicator of brain activity. And so if participants are trying to learn a certain task, we can track which brain areas have more blood flow or blood oxygen, and infer that there's more neural activity during those tasks. And this turns out to be quite a good measure of neural activity. So more recently, people have been trying to link up various different things. So instead of just looking at the brain activity, we might want to look at the behavior of participants while they're learning, how well they're learning. We might want to have a model of the cognitive process. So how is this problem solved? And then we want to link this to the brain. So not only do we see what's active in these fMRI scans, but also what kind of process is going on in the brain. So hopefully I can tell you about one study that I'm running that will explain this a bit more. So in this study, I looked at how people learn new concepts. And the question we had was, can people use existing knowledge to aid the learning of new concepts? For example, when you first learn about a new concept like wasabi, turns out it's very similar to something you already know. It's the horseradish. So you can see here, this is a fresh wasabi and this is fresh horseradish. And we can use this prior knowledge to fill in the gaps, and we should be able to grasp this new concept faster. And so how do we test this? Well, so we wanted to test, can people transfer knowledge from one category structure to another? And so we tested people with two concept learning tasks with shared structure, but different stimuli. So here, I asked people to learn which objects were designed by a designer A and which were designed by designer B. And there were three features: this top, handle, and the stand. And we're using what we call a rule plus exception structure, which means that designer A usually has objects which has this round top, and designer B has objects with this open top. Unless there's this exception item where this combination of features, then this would also be designer A, and this combination of features would be designer B. And in the second task, I asked participants to learn about rooms. So which designer designed the rooms? And again, we have three features and the same kind of rule plus exception structure. And so if you just look at the windows, most of the time that's predictive of which designer it is, unless you have this combination of features. And so the idea is that if you were able to learn this structure, maybe you would be able to transfer this knowledge, this abstract category knowledge, to learn this second task, and you would be able to learn that faster. On each trial, participants had to look at this image, and they responded whether it was designed by Ray or Till. And they were given feedback with this green or red square showing if they were correct or incorrect. With the rooms, it was the same kind of idea. They would have to learn by trial and error which designer designed which rooms. So we tested 140 participants online. And so in one group, the experimental group, there would be two tasks, like the object and the rooms task, and they would share the same structure as I just showed you now. In the control group, they would do two tasks, again, objects and rooms, but then this time they would have different structures, so they wouldn't be able to transfer any information from the first task into the second task, and they shouldn't be learning faster. So here are the behavior results. On the y-axis, you can see accuracy, and on the x-axis is a learning block. So over time, over learning blocks, people should really get higher and higher performance as they learn. And as you can see here, in task one of the experimental group in the blue line, participants learn relatively slower and then get higher accuracy over time. But in the orange line here, you can see that this is task two, where they have already learned this structure, this rule plus exception structure, and they were able to apply this knowledge to speed up learning. So that you can see that this is learned faster overall. In the control condition, in the control group where they didn't have a shared structure, you can see this red line, they are not learning as fast as the experimental group. So how might people do this? How might the brain be able to do this? I use the artificial neural network model, which is a model to figure out how the brain might do this, how it learns the task, but also how it might transfer its knowledge from task one to task two. So here's a schematic of the model I used. So in task one, the stimuli can be represented by the blue dots here, and then the rooms can be represented by the pink dots here. And so the model, this artificial neural network model, is able to take the stimulus as input and then try to learn based on these artificial neurons activations, how to output the right category decision, in this case, the designers. And so the idea is that if in the first task there is able to learn some kind of activity in order to output the designers, maybe if there's shared structure, task 2 can reuse that structure without as much relearning. So it can reuse these representations, these activities, and output the designers without learning as much. So it can reuse this information. So interestingly, we were able to recapture what humans did. So you can see here in the transfer condition, which is when people had learned the first task with the same structure, they were able to speed up learning. Whereas in the control task, where people did not have the same structure, they learned much slower. And so how did the model do this? Now, so we can't peer into people's brains yet, but we can look into these models to look at what's happening. And so one idea is that task 1 stimuli might show similar activities to those stimuli in task 2. And so there should be a high correlation between the activities when the model sees these images. This is what we see. So these are the activations across these different layers. And you can see in the orange, for the orange curve, they're highly correlated. The neural network model's activations are correlated between the object images and the room images. So you can see in each layer, they're getting more and more correlated. On the other hand, in the control task, where there's not as much shared structure, they're still correlated because they share activations, but they're less correlated. So they can't use it to speed up learning. So in conclusion, people can extract abstract concept structure from perceptual features to aid the learning of new concepts. An artificial neural network model shows similar transfer effect as humans, and they do this by reusing existing neurons, how they activate according to the objects and the rooms. And this was able to speed learning. So for my next step, I'm going to use functional MRI to test whether the brain reuses neural representation to aid the learning of new concepts. So I'd like to thank my advisor, Professor John Duncan at the unit, and also my funding is listed here. Thank you for your attention.